Israel-Hamas war. We are following some breaking news.
North Korean leader Kim Jong-un has kicked off 2024 with a dire warning.
Turning now to that breaking news from South Africa, where more than 70 people have died.
Daniel 12 just changed everything I've ever thought about the end days. Hi, I'm Realtor Mike with Shofar 2324. I'm just going to get right to the point. I must have read Daniel 12 1,000 times in my life. However, after an exhaustive 2.5-year study of the Bible, debates, seminars, and conferences, I read Daniel 12 again, and this time, changed everything. And I'm going to pose a few questions like, can the Bible negate itself? And if so, if God knows the future, why would he do that? Speaking of the future, what if the abomination wasn't in the middle, as many believe, but rather delayed until the end? Does Scripture even suggest such a thing? I want to walk you through what I discovered in Daniel 12, and how it changes the timeline of the end days. Before I do, let me explain what I and most have believed the Bible tells us in Daniel 9. Daniel 9 tells us that there will be 7 years. Much of the Bible tells us it will be a horrific 7 years. In Matthew 24, Jesus says of those days, "For then there shall be great tribulation, such as was not since the beginning of the world to this time, no, nor ever shall be." The beginning of Revelation tells us Jesus opens 7 seals, and we'll see a great war, inflation, and plenty of death. Daniel 9:27 also tells us that Israel will once again sacrifice animals at a temple sometime in our future. The Antichrist will put an end to the sacrifice and call himself the living God at this same temple. It reads, "In the middle of the week, he, the Antichrist, shall bring an end to sacrifice and offering. And on the wing of abominations shall be one who makes desolate." Because of this verse, the sacrifice and the abomination are both placed in the middle. The 7th seal brings on the 7 trumpets, which most believe portrays an asteroid colliding with Earth sometime during the last 3.5 years. Also during that same time frame, towards the very end, the 7 bowls are poured out, and it will be the worst years of the 7. This will end with the return of Christ. This is how most view these final 7 years. So now that you have a basic understanding of what I and most have believed of the timeline, let me explain how Daniel 12 changes all of that. I'd like to ask you a question. See if this makes any sense. If your doctor told you you needed an operation and you asked what the recovery time is, and he responded that from the operation to getting back to 100% would be 3 months, what would that mean to you? Perhaps I told you that I was in an argument with my wife, and I said the time between starting the argument and realizing she's probably right would be 60 minutes. What does that mean to you? Probably that the time between surgery and 100% health is 3 months, or the time between my argument with my wife and realizing she's right was 30 minutes. To be more exact and pay attention to how I phrase this. It's not, and this is not a trick statement. It's probably exactly as you're hearing it. If I came to you and I said, I'm headed into town to pick up groceries and get gas, and from the time that I pick up groceries and get gas, there'll be 30 minutes. It's a strange way of saying it, I'll give you that. But if I said, from the time that I pick up groceries and get gas, there will be 30 minutes, what do you think I'd mean by this? It might sound like a silly question. One might wonder why in the world anyone would ever question me on its meaning. I've run this by multiple people, and they all tell me the same thing, that there would be 30 minutes between the two events, groceries and gas. Rightfully, no one thought I meant there would be 30 minutes from these two events till something else. And if that was what I meant, you'd ask me, well, 30 minutes until what? I didn't say. No, to leave a sentence open like that would bring on confusion. It's obvious what I meant. There would be 30 minutes between groceries and gas. Just like you knew what the doctor suggested and the time between my argument and the resolution with my wife. With that, hear what is told to Daniel in Daniel 12:11. And from the time that the daily sacrifice is taken away and the abomination is set up, there shall be 1,290 days. That's the same exact sentence, just two different events. Between these two events, there will be 1,290 days. Yet most don't see it this way. Rather than saying there is 1,290 days between these two events, they say from these two events there will be 1,290 days until something else. Until what? Apparently we're not told, just something else. So rather than saying it's 1,290 days between these two events, why did I assume it's a time frame from these two events to something later on? Something we apparently aren't told about, and Daniel doesn't seem to question. There are three reasons people say this. Revelation 11 and 13 tells us that the Antichrist begins his reign in the middle, exactly 1,260 days before Christ's second coming, not 1,290 days. Then, Daniel 9:27 specifically says that the ending of the sacrifice is in the middle. Again, the exact middle of 7 years on the Hebrew calendar is 1,260 days. So if Daniel 12:11 is telling us that the abomination is 1,290 days later, that would place the abomination 75 days after Christ's return. And according to Revelation 19, that cannot be the case. Daniel even seems to suggest that the abomination is right there with the ending of the sacrifice, in the middle. Lastly, in Matthew 24, Jesus warns Israel to run. When does he tell them to do this? When the Antichrist declares himself as God at the temple, the abomination. And John records in Revelation 12 that Israel runs in the middle. All three of these seem to be incredible reasons, even proof that Daniel 12:11 must be speaking of something else. Cannot be the time between the sacrifice and the abomination. Yet, that's exactly what Daniel 12 says. Perhaps there's a language barrier, or I'm not understanding context. However, according to Strong's Concordance, the language in Daniel 12 is exactly what it seems. So, what about context? Throughout Daniel 12, Daniel is talking to an angel about the final 7 years of the world. He questions the angel several times. Finally, he's not given an answer, but he is told that from the ending of the sacrifice to the abomination, there will be 1,290 days. So, the context is the 7 years, not something that happens after the 7 years. If that were the case, Daniel would question again, as he's already done. Please forgive me. Allow me to ask one more question. What's to be the end of these 1,290 days? He's already been asking these questions, but now he doesn't. Why? Because it's understood. Just as you understood me when I used the same sentence about groceries and gas. I'll read it again. And from the time that the daily sacrifice is taken away and the abomination is set up, there shall be 1,290 days. Therefore, shouldn't we at least be asking questions? And I have one for you. Can Scripture nullify Scripture? And I don't believe that it can. Else, what other Scripture can be nullified? And who's to say which verse nullifies which? Rather, if Scripture is truly the living Word, if God is the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow, it should work in harmony with itself. Yet, Daniel 9:27 says of that final week, which is interpreted as 7 years, in the middle of the week, he shall bring an end to sacrifice and offering, and on the wing of abominations shall be one who makes desolate. Sounds like the ending of Israel's sacrificing at the temple and the abomination are both in the middle. Yet, Daniel 12:11 reads, and from the time that the daily sacrifice is taken away and the abomination is set up, there shall be 1,290 days. Does one nullify the other? And the answer is no. There must be an answer to this. Most, as I've already mentioned, just say it must be something else after the 7 years are over. But as explained, that's not how you or I, nor Daniel, understand this, nor is the context of the Scripture. So, how do we make both passages work in harmony? This is the dilemma I found myself in. Somehow, both verses must be true. And they are, once you understand the period in Daniel 9:27, separating the sacrifice from the abomination. Once again, Daniel 9:27 reads, in the middle of the week, he, the Antichrist, shall bring an end to sacrifice and offering, and on the wing of abominations shall be one who makes desolate. If I go back to my analogy, I'll be heading into town to get groceries and get gas. You would know that during that same trip, I'm doing both of these, but not at the same time. They're two different events during my trip. So too is Daniel 9:27. Two different events during the same 7 final years. I'll read it again. See if you pick up on it. In the middle of the week, he shall bring an end to sacrifice and offering. Note the period. And on the wing of abominations shall be one who makes desolate. Groceries and gas. Remember, all scripture should work together in harmony. So to make this clear, let's combine Daniel 9:27 and Daniel 12:11. And let's see if they can work together in harmony. It would read as follows. In the middle of the week, he shall bring an end to sacrifice and offering. From the time that the daily sacrifice is taken away and the abomination is set up, there shall be 1290 days. And on the wing of abominations shall be one who makes desolate. Combining these two together, we can see that they can be separated, and according to Daniel 12:11, they must be by 1290 days. But what do I have to support this? Other than the words of Daniel, is there anywhere else in Scripture we can see where the Antichrist has control, but has not declared himself as God at the temple yet? And there is. We find this in Revelation 11:1-2, where John indicates that the Antichrist will rule in Israel starting in the middle for specifically 1260 days. But not at the temple. Not yet. It reads, "And there was given me a reed like unto a rod." It's an older time measuring tape. "And the angel stood, saying, Rise, and measure the temple of God, and the altar, and them that worship therein. But the court, which is without the temple, outside, leave out, measure it not, for it is given unto the Gentiles, and the holy city, Jerusalem, shall they tread underfoot for 42 months. John has been told to measure the temple and the worshipers therein, but do not measure outside the temple, for it has been given to the world for 42 months. It's exactly 1260 days. That answers the first issue. The Antichrist does begin his reign in the middle, but is held back from pronouncing himself as God until later. Ruling the world and Israel, including Jerusalem, and declaring himself God are two separate events, not a single event altogether. If that were the case, we'd be nullifying Revelation 11. But if the ending of the sacrifice is in the middle, 1260 days before the end, that doesn't answer the second question as to the abomination coming 1290 days later, after Christ's return. Revelation 19:20 talks about what happens when Christ returns. It reads as follows, "But the beast was taken, and with him the false prophet. These both were cast alive into a lake of fire, burning with brimstone." So, once again, if we suggested that the Antichrist abomination at the temple comes 75 days after Christ's return, it would nullify Revelation 19. But at least we're on the right path, and we're starting to ask questions. Again, for all Scripture to be accurate, be in harmony, either the times must change or the position of the sacrifice. Now, we don't want to change Scripture, but we also want truth. Going through Daniel multiple times, I suddenly realized the angel talking to Daniel in Daniel 9 does not give us a specific time like he does everywhere else. He doesn't say the ending of the sacrifice at the temple in Israel will end 1260 days before the end. He simply tells Daniel the ending of the sacrifice is in the middle, which is interesting. since he's very specific to the day in other verses. Why is this? And does it give us a clue? Indeed it does. If you're looking at 7 years, that's 2,520 days, and you see an event happening just a few days before the middle, without having to be exact, would you not just say it's in the middle? When the angel tells Daniel it's in the middle, that's not specific, but it is a reference point. It most definitely is in the middle. But nowhere in Scripture does it tell us an exact day. So if it's not exactly in the middle, where does the Bible put the ending of the sacrifice? Just as Daniel is told in Daniel 12:11 that the ending of the sacrifice and the abomination are 1,290 days apart, he's then told in the very next verse where to place them. Daniel 12:12 states, "Blessed is the one who waits for and reaches the end of the 1,335 days." Why are people blessed for and waiting this duration of time? Once again, some assume this is after Christ's return, possibly judgment. However, according to Revelation 20, judgment doesn't come until after Christ's 1,000-year reign. Others say it's Christ's wedding, but at this point, they're just guessing. Nowhere in Scripture does anything tell us this. Remember, the context is the ending of the sacrifice, the abomination, and the 1,290 days. All of which is something during the 7 years, not something after. And he's told right here that they that wait will be blessed. But for what? And why doesn't Daniel ask? Unless it's understood. Daniel indicates in verse 11 that the ending of the sacrifice begins the 1,335 days. But what ends it? And why are they blessed? If we want Scripture to interpret Scripture, then Christ gives us an answer in Luke 13:22 through 35, where he quotes David in Psalm 118:26. Jesus tells the Sadducees exactly when he'll return. He'll return when they say, "Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord." Sounds a lot like what Daniel is told. Blessed is he who waits for and reaches the end of the 1,335th day. I'm not guessing, not making assumptions. I'm using Scripture to interpret Scripture. Christ tells the Jews, they will be blessed when they say, "Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord." At the end of the 1,335th day, Daniel is told that they will be blessed. That day is Christ's return. Also, if words matter, take careful note of the words God gives Daniel. Blessed is the one who waits for and reaches, makes it, comes to. He's speaking to Israeli Jews, telling them to wait. Those that make it through are blessed. This indicates not all will make it. Now, I'm aware that Christ destroys the wicked when he returns. However, Daniel is not saying that some won't make it due to judgment. He's speaking to those who can make it to the end. Blessed is the one who waits for and reaches the end of the 1,335 days. This most certainly is Christ's second coming and the end of Jacob's 70th week. So we're given a specific number of days between taking the sacrifice away and Christ's second coming. So if you want to know where the ending of the sacrifice is, let's look at the clues we've been given. Daniel is told in 9:27 that it's in the middle. In chapter 12, verse 12, we're told it's 1,335 days before Christ. The question is, do these two verses work together? If we start from the end and work our way backwards 1,335 days, is the ending of the sacrifice near the middle of the 7? Out of 2,520 days, this places the ending of the sacrifice just 75 days before the exact middle. So they do work together. Then, 1,290 days after the ending of the sacrifice, we come to the abomination, which is now 45 days before, not after, Christ's second coming. That also means God will hold the Antichrist back for 1,215 days. That's the number of days between the Antichrist coming into power and the final 45 days, or 1,260 minus 45. By the way, 1,215 days divided by a month is exactly 40 months, which according to Hebrew scripture is the number for waiting. And God is going to make the Antichrist do just that. Wait. If you get confused by all the numbers, here's another way of explaining. Daniel 9 tells us that there will be 7 years of tribulation. At the end of that tribulation, that 7 years, Christ will return. There is a middle, exactly 3.5 years in. That is 1,260 days on the Jewish calendar. That's the exact amount of time that Revelation 13 tells us that the Antichrist will rule for 1,260 days. Daniel 9 also says that the Antichrist will end the sacrifice towards the middle. So ending the sacrifice towards the middle. And Daniel 12:11 tells us the time frame between ending the sacrifice and declaring himself God at the temple, the abomination, is 1,290 days. 1,290 days between ending the sacrifice and the abomination. Revelation 19 tells us that that cannot be, because it puts the abomination after Christ's return. Therefore, everyone says the 1,290 days must be something else. What? We're not told, just something else. But again, that's not what Daniel 12 says. Daniel 9:27 tells us that the Antichrist ends the sacrifice in the middle. But that's not specific. Rather, if Daniel 9 is referencing a reference point for the middle, then technically the ending of the sacrifice could be slightly before the middle. It's a reference point for the middle of the 7. So, the Antichrist and the Gentiles will tread upon the holy city, Jerusalem, Judea, for 1,260 days. But for a time, they will not have access to the temple. God will hold him back for a period of time using his 2 witnesses. Revelation 11 tells us that when their testimony is over, the Antichrist will have them killed and finally enter the temple and declare himself as God, the abomination. But when is this? Daniel 12:12 tells us that 1,335 days before Christ, 1,335 days before Christ, this is in Daniel 12:12, the Antichrist ends the sacrifice. That's 1,335 days. That puts ending of the sacrifice 75 days before the middle. Still in the middle, but not 1,260 days, which is not a requirement, just that it's in the middle. Now, with the information that Daniel gives us, we can go forward from the ending of the sacrifice. We can go forward 1,290 days. And we no longer move past Christ. We're now 45 days before Christ, where Jesus tells us that anyone left in the temple in this Judean area must leave. The temple is no longer protected by the two witnesses. They held evil at bay for 40 months. Where do I get 40 months? Well, the Antichrist comes to rule right in the middle for 1,260 days. He will rule and he'll continue to rule and be the abomination, set up the abomination at the temple, declare himself as God at this point. How long is that? Well, that's 1,260 minus 45, or the time frame between setting himself up as ruler to the point of the abomination is 1,215 days, or divided by a month is 40 months. So the two witnesses will hold the Antichrist back for 40 months. However, it is now in the hands of the Antichrist, and these final days are shortened to 45, and it will be the worst, the most devastating days of the 7 years. That takes care of the second problem. When interpreted appropriately, the abomination doesn't come after Christ, but before. Not only does this allow everything to work together in harmony, nothing is nullified. And it even fulfills Christ's prophecy in Matthew 24:22, that unless those days were shortened, no flesh would be saved. But for the elect's sake, those days will be shortened to only 45 days before the end. Speaking of Christ, what about Matthew 24:15? Jesus tells those that are in Judea to run when they see the abomination occur. Revelation 12 tells us that exactly 1,260 days in, the same time the Antichrist comes into power, Satan chases a woman representing those people in Judea into the desert. It certainly sounds like this places the abomination perfectly in the middle, not towards the end, or does it? If so, then as mentioned, the Antichrist has control over the temple in the middle, which negates Revelation 11, where the temple has not yet been handed over to him. If the Bible must work together in harmony, if God is the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow, then there must be something we've missed. And there is. Again, Revelation 11 and 13 state that 1,260 days before Christ, the Antichrist will reign and will control the city, but not the temple. Not yet. At this moment, Israel will begin seeking refuge in the desert. just as Revelation 12 says they will. However, this only begins their trek. Just as Revelation 11 tells us, some will hide themselves in the temple. They will be safe here until the Antichrist has the 2 witnesses killed. At that point, the Antichrist will have them killed and have complete access to the temple. It's at this moment the abomination occurs. And according to Christ in Matthew 24:15, the remainder of the Jews must run, else they'll be put to death. Realizing there can be a separation between Israel beginning that trek into the desert and a completing of it at the time of the abomination solves the final question. Therefore, what I have shown you is at the very least plausible, and I believe solves the riddles of the timeline in these end days, those final 7 years, including many things Christ said of them in Matthew 24, Mark 13, and Luke 21. Now, I realize this completely changes how most have seen these final years play out. So I know there will be some who have been told otherwise, some who have taught otherwise, and simply say that I'm wrong. I'm okay with that. And maybe someone will have a good argument for why I'm wrong. If so, I'll remove this video and replace it with what I've learned. However, are you as open as I am to being wrong? Are you open to studying? Remove guessing and assumptions. I'm willing to have that open-minded dialogue. Are you? With this information and a very heavy dig into the end times over the past 2.5 years, I have put together a very detailed 7-year timeline. But I have not found that many share my passion in this arena. That said, I'll post this 7-part series of the end times timeline if there is interest. As of right now, this is a new channel. This is my very first video on this channel. So I have no subscribers, no likes, no shares. If you would like me to post that detailed timeline, I'd like to know if there's any interest before I do. Say 1,500 likes. I'm not trying to make money off that. 1,500 likes wouldn't even do the trick, nor is this channel even subscribed to earn money from YouTube. That would simply tell me there is some interest, and I'll do the heavy work of putting these videos together. If you would like to know when or if I post those timeline videos, click the subscribe button. Share it with others. Like the video by clicking the thumbs up, which also causes YouTube to share it with more people. Nonetheless, I appreciate you watching Shofar 2324. I'm Realtor Mike, and until next time, Maranatha.